Imagine a world without malls or fast fashion. No electricity, no Wi-Fi, and even gadgets. A world so much different from our present world. Will you survive?
Ay 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 ugayam
Diving headfirst into a Philippines reborn,
ugayam galayaman
the pre-colonial period, where nature wasn't conquered but worshipped, where homes were woven from bamboo, not bricks, and where communities thrived, not just survived.
Good day everyone, I am Regine Senora from STEM 11 Apollonius, and I am going to discuss all about the pre-colonial period. We will tackle about the geographic, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions of the Philippine literary history from pre-colonial period. So, di ka na ba? Gina! The pre-colonial period started from the early times until 1564 before the Spaniards colonized the Philippines in 1565. Pre-colonial period is the root of Philippine literature, and since there is no form of writing or education back then, the literary pieces were based on oral tradition. So basically, the Filipino children only learn through observing and watching their elders. They learn different skills merely for survival. So let us learn more about this period. The pre-colonial clothing. The clothing nowadays is so much different from the clothing back then. As you can see on the screen, there is a big difference on the pre-colonial clothing and the present clothing. Back then, there were no shirts, dress, or coat worn by men and women, whereas nowadays, the exposure of the skin is less, and men are already wearing shirts or cardigan. And there's this word, aesthetic, that is used by millennials nowadays or Generation Z to describe an outfit. Uy! During the pre-colonial period, their clothing consists of upper and lower part. For male, the upper part is called kangan, which is a jacket with short sleeves and an opening on the chest part. The color of the kangan indicates rank, red kangan for the chief and black or blue kangan for the commoners. Meanwhile, the lower part is called bahag, which is a strip of cloth wrapped around the waist and between the legs. And there's also a headgear called putong, which is a piece of cloth worn around the head. This also tells the social status or achievement of the individual wearing it. If it's red, it symbolizes bravery. For the female clothing, we have the baro or kamisa for the upper part and patajong or saya for the lower part. Some women also wear tapis, which is a rectangular cloth worn around the waist on top of the saya. Just like nowadays, men and women wore ornaments to look attractive. During the pre-colonial period, both men and women wear kalumbiga, bracelets, leglets, pendants, and gold rings, but these are more common among women. Some men even wore gold fillings between the teeth, and tattoos were also fashionable among men, and this symbolizes bravery in war. During the pre-colonial period, there is a so-called pyramid or the social classes which shows the state of life of a person. On the upper part or the peak of the triangle are the maharlikas, timawas on the middle, and alipin on the lower part. So, how do these three social classes differ? First, we have the maharlikas or the nobles. Maharlikas are made up of the datu and their families which held political power. They were addressed with the title Gat or Lakan among the Tagalogs. Timawas or freemen, on the other hand, are the free commoners or the middle class. They were skilled farmers, artisans, and warriors, and they were sometimes described as the working class. On the other hand, alipin or the slaves are the dependent lower class which acquired their status by inheritance, captivity, purchase, failure to settle debts, or by committing a crime. There are two types of alipin, the aliping namamahay and the aliping sagigilid. Aliping namamahay are slaves that can own a property or land and can pay tribute. On the other hand, aliping sagigilid are those who can't own a land or a property and are completely dependent on their masters. Aliping sagigilid were real slaves because they were forbidden to form their own families and they could be used as a payment for a debt. Let's move on to the houses. Let's expand more our knowledge by learning about the houses in the pre-colonial period. Comparing the houses from the pre-colonial period and our houses now in the present, it is really evident that the houses now look sturdier than the past houses. We can really see that the homes back then were made of light materials such as wood, bamboo, and nipa palm, which allows natural ventilation adapting to the tropical climate. These houses are called bahay kubo and these were built on stilts or elevated from the ground in order to protect themselves from flooding and from wild animals or pests. Some Filipino tribes, such as the Kalingas, Mandayas, and Bagobos, built their houses on treetops, and others, such as the Badjaos, built their houses on boats. So, let us move on to the government system. During the pre-colonial period, the unit of the government is called barangay, which consisted of 30 to 100 families. The term came from the Malay word balangay, which means boat. The balangay was the first wooden watercraft excavated in Southeast Asia and is evidence of early Filipino craftsmanship and their seamanship skills during pre-colonial times. Barangays were headed by chieftains called Datu or Raha. Datu or Raha played a big role because they are the chief executive, the legislator, the judge in trials, and also the supreme commander in times of war. They are also responsible in implementing laws with the guidance of a group of elders, and individuals called umalokohan were responsible for announcing and explaining the laws. There was no national government back then because no one was strong enough to unite the archipelago into one nation. Alliances were also common among barangays for mutual protection and trading of goods. These were formalized in a ritual called sanduguan or blood compact. Sanduguan was an ancient ritual in the Philippines intended to seal a friendship or treaty or to validate an agreement. The contracting parties would cut their hands and pour their blood into a cup filled with a liquid and drink the mixture. Next, we have is taxation. Ancient Filipinos paid taxes called buwis to the datu for the protection. Non-payment of taxes is punishable, which can sometimes lead to death. On the other hand, the family of the datu does not need to pay taxes.
Wow! Sana all!
So, what happens when there is a disagreement or argument between individuals? That falls on the judicial process. Let us proceed to the judicial process. When there are arguments or disputes between individuals, these were settled by a court made up of the village chief and the council of elders. Both parties will face each other in front of the court with their respective witnesses, and they will take an oath to tell the truth, but most of the time, the one who presents the most witnesses wins the case. When the case is not readily decided by the barangay court, a trial by ordeal was resorted to. So, what is a trial by ordeal? Trial by ordeal. To determine the innocence of an accused, he is made to go through a number of ordeals which he must succeed. Some examples of ordeals include dipping one's hand in boiling water, plunging into a river, and staying underwater for as long as possible, and chewing uncooked rice. Let's talk about love, courtship, and marriage. During the pre-colonial period, men in general were monogamous, which means that they are involved in a marriage or a relationship with only one person or partner at a time. Their wives are called asawa, which is still used nowadays. When it comes to courtship, the man has to show his patience and dedication to both the lady and her parents. If the man wins the trust of the parents, he does not immediately marry the woman, but he has to satisfy several conditions. The requirements are: first, he must give a dowry to the family of the bride, which are the property, wealth, goods, or money from groom to bride. The man must also give a bigay kaya, which is a piece of land or gold, to the bride's family. His parents, of course, must also give a panghimuyat or a gift to the bride. The man must also give a payment or himaraw to the bride's parents for raising the bride during her infancy period. There must also be a bigay soso or a wet nurse who also receive a dowry. Once he had settled all the requirements, the groom-to-be will now bring his parents to meet with the bride-to-be's parents to arrange the wedding and make the final arrangements, which is called pamamalae or pamumulungan, or as we all know, pamamanhikan. But what will happen if the groom and the bride have different social classes? Back then, mixed marriage or the marriage of two different social classes were allowed in a society. For instance, a nabol or a dato may marry someone from the timawas. However, the status of the children was dependent upon the status of their parents. So, if they ever build a family, the status of their children is divided evenly between the parents. Single children of mixed marriage were half free and half dependent. So, let us now move on to the religious beliefs of the ancient Filipinos. Native Filipinos worshipped many gods and goddesses. They were animists who believed in the existence of the Supreme Being, whom the Tagalogs referred to as Bathala. Some of the gods and goddesses that they worshipped are Edianale, the god of agriculture. Edianale is often depicted guiding farmers and shepherds, imparting knowledge on cultivating crops and tending to livestock. Sidapa, the god of death, who reaps the kalag or souls of the dead to give to Magwayan, who brings them to Sulad or Saad. Agni, god of fire. He is regarded as the friend and protector of humanity. In particular, he safeguards the home. Balangao, the god of rainbow. Balangao is thought as the guardian of this natural phenomenon that occurs after a huge storm or heavy downpour. Mandarangan, the god of war. He controls the fate of warriors and brings success in battle. Siginarugan, the god of health. And as mentioned earlier, Bathala, which is the supreme being. He is regarded as the creator and ruler of the universe. Did you hear that? I think that's an aswang or a monster. Speaking of aswang, we will now talk about the superstitious beliefs of the ancient Filipinos. Back then, Filipinos believed in some scary creatures. One of the mystical creatures is aswang, which is a shape-shifting evil creature. Tiyanak, which is a small humanoid monster that pretends to be an innocent baby before attacking humans. We also have Tikbalang, which is an evil entity who is a half human and half horse. Then, we have Kapre, which is a tree giant that is known for its strong smell. Duende, which is an old man dwarf creature who lives in the woods. Lastly, we have the Mangkukulam, who uses a black magic or spell that can cause various effects to the victim. So, have you learned enough? Speaking of learning, let us now dive into the world of education system during the pre-colonial period. Education system. Education back then was way different when compared to the education nowadays. Back then, education was only acquired through observation, imitation, and practice. There was no formal education, so the children were taught to read and write by their parents, unlike nowadays that we students go to school and are taught by teachers. Commonly, fathers taught male children how to hunt, fish, and other economic activities, whereas females are taught by mothers to manage a household. So generally, education back then was merely for survival, which is way different from the education nowadays that we have different subjects like math, science, English, and other subjects. Since we're discussing about education, let us also learn about the literary pieces during the pre-colonial period. So, what are those? First, we have Riddle, or as we all know, Bugtong. It is made up of one or more measured lines with rhymes and may consist of 4 to 12 syllables. It showcases the Filipino wit, literary talent, and keen observation of the surrounding. It refers to a wordplay puzzle consisting of a question or statement with a double meaning, where the answer is hidden or obscured. Its purpose is to entertain, to educate in a way that the knowledge can be passed from one generation to the next, to titillate, to curse without expressly cursing, and of course, to preserve the culture. Here are some examples. Hinila ko ang tadyang, lumapad ang tiyan. What is it? An umbrella. Isa ang pasukan, tatlo ang labasan. The answer is a shirt. Dalawang batong itim, malayo ang nararating. Eyes. And lastly, I'm tall when I'm young, I'm short when I'm old. Candle. Let us now proceed to the next, which is Proverbs. Proverbs are short poems that are used as rules on good behaviors by our ancestors. These are often used to express a single idea that has a witty ending and contains lessons about life, human nature, and morality. Proverbs can be classified into three, which are salawikain, sawikain, and maxims. Let's take a look at the examples. First, we have salawikain. Nasa Diyos ang awa, nasa tao ang gawa. This means that praying is more effective if we also put effort on what we do. Another example is, anuman ang gawin, makapitong iisipin. This means that we should always think carefully about the decisions that we make. Basically, salawikain are short poems or sayings that needs deep thinking to get the lesson behind it. Next, we have sawikain. Examples are, butas ang bulsa, which means having no money, and born with a golden spoon, which means he or she is rich. So, sawikain is what we all know as idiomatic expressions, which has a meaning behind the actual phrase. Lastly, we have maxims. The examples are, pag hindi ukol, hindi bubukol, meaning, no matter how hard you try to achieve something, if it's not meant for you, you cannot have it. Then, we have, sa marunong umunawa, sukat ang isang salita. This means that he who knows how to understand before all else also knows how to listen. Basically, maxims are truthful and they are direct. Let us move on to the next literary piece, which is Bulong or chant. Back then, Bulong was used in witchcraft or enchantment, especially in remote places in Visayas. It is a repeated phrase or song recited rhythmically in unison, often used for ceremonial or ritual purposes. Some examples are, tabi-tabi po, makikiraan lang po, and pera usog. Our ancestors believed in spirits or supernatural creatures, so they used this bulong to ask for permission from them so that bad things won't happen to them. Next literary piece is folk song, which is one of the oldest forms of Philippine literature. It is a form of folk lyric which expresses the people's hopes, aspirations, and lifestyles. Folk songs can be divided into three, which are folk songs, lullaby, and serenade. Folk songs are songs with lines that are repetitive, didactic, and sonorous. Some examples are Bahay Kubo,
Bahay kubo, kahit munting
Magtanim ay di biro,
magtanim ay di biro, maghapong nakayuko.
and Ang Pipit.
May tumukol sa pipit sa sanga ng isang kahoy.
Another kind of folk song is lullaby, or also known as uyayi. These are soothing songs to put a baby to sleep. Common examples are Ili-ili tulog anay,
Lili, tulog anay.
and Sa uwi ng duyan.
Sana'y di magmaliw araw.
Serenade or harana. These are courtship songs used by young men to capture the heart of the girl they love. Some examples are O Ilaw by Danilo Santos,
O ilaw sa gabing malamig.
and Dungawin Mo Hirang by Rubin Tagalog.
Iliw ko'y pakinggan.
For the fifth literary piece, we have folk tales, or also known as kwentong bayan. These are stories about the personification of nature. These are fictional narratives typically told by voice and passed down orally from generation to generation. Unlike written stories with known authors, these tales evolve and adapt over time, shaped by the voices and imaginations of each storyteller. Examples are The Boy Who Became a Stone and The Flood Story. Next, we have epics. Epics are lengthy narratives recounting noble deeds. These are derived from ancient oral tradition narrating the deeds and adventures of a heroic or legendary figure. Some features of folk epics include these are narratives of sustained length, based on oral tradition, revolving around supernatural events or heroic deeds, in the form of verse, and is chanted or sung. Here are some well-known examples. Biag ni Lamang, which is an Ilocano epic, Ibalon of Bukid Darangan, and Bantugan of the Maranao. So let's move on. Then we have myth. It is a narrative that describes and portrays in symbolic language the origin of the basic elements and assumptions of a culture. These are derived from Philippine folk literature, which is the traditional oral literature of the Filipino people. Some different creation myths are the story of Bathala and the story of Manananggal. Next literary piece is legend. It is a form of prose or story explaining the origin of a thing, place, plans, or how various objects came to be. Its aim is to entertain and to impart knowledge in life. The events in a legend are imaginary, devoid of truth, and unbelievable. Some examples are Alamat ng Pinya and Legend of the Christmas Spider. Next, fables. These are short stories written for indigenous Filipino children. These feature animal characters that behave like people to convey a message or virtue. The smart frog and the fox, the lion and the deer are some examples. The second to the last literary piece that we'll discuss is the Tanaga. It is a quatrain or a four-liner poem with 7 syllables each with the same rhyme at the end of each line. It does not have a title and can have different rhyming patterns such as AABB, ABAB, or AAA. Here is an example of Tanaga which is made by yours truly. Sakit na nadarama, nilihim ng biktima. Pilit itinatago, buhay na nagdurugo. As you can observe, it has a rhyming pattern of AABB and it has 7 syllables in each line. Finally, the last literary piece during the pre-colonial period is the Ambahan, which is somewhat similar to Tanaga. Just like Tanaga, Ambahan is also a 7-syllable metric lines with rhymes, but it can have more than 4 lines. It is a traditional poetry of the Hanuno Mangyans of Oriental Mindoro, which is normally inscribed on bamboo using the writing system called the Surat Mangyan. So, this is an example of an ambahan written on a bamboo in Surat Mangyan. And I also have here an example of an ambahan which is also made by me. Maraming nagagalit, bansang ipinagkait. Kastilang nagbabadya sa bawat residensya. Ngiting nakakaakit, luha ang laging kabit. Kay hirap na sumaya sa bansang di malaya. So, this poem has rhyming pattern of AABB, and this somehow talks about the nationalism or the freedom of a country. It has 8 lines, so It is an ambahan because it has more than 4 lines. Finally, after a very long discussion, we're done with the pre-colonial period. Let's have a recap of the 11 literary pieces. We have the Bugtong, Proverbs, Bulong, folk songs, folk tales, epics, myths, legends, fables, Tanaga, and ambahan. I hope you learned something from my discussion. Thank you for listening, and remember, history isn't just dates and names. It's the beating heart of people. Carry the warmth of the pre-colonial era in your spirit and let its light illuminate the way forward.